welcome to the third episode of the Tyre Recycling Podcast. Today we are returning to part 2 of our expert witness interview with Martin von Wolfersdorff of Wolfersdorff Consulting. I'm Richard Wilson, contributor to Tyre and Rubber Recycling, and Ewan Scott, editor for Tyre and Rubber Recycling, joins me. Ewan, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm enjoying the cooler weather this week. I'm actually enjoying here in the rain, watering the garden for a change. Business-wise, we're slowly starting to get back to business and see developments as commerce starts to get back on its feet.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we've actually had here in Spain. We've actually had quite a rainy morning as well, which is not very custom for this time of year. But moving more back onto Tyre recycling side of things, in the last episode, we obviously saw part 1 of your expert witness interview with Martin, and we looked at the growing interest from tyre companies in pyrolysis and how the market was looking for recovered carbon black. What do we have in part 2 for viewers to look forward to?
There are traditionally 2 directions that pyrolysis can take. One is to produce oil, and the other is to produce recovered carbon black. We ask what impact the current crash in oil prices has had on the market, and has it impacted on the companies' preferences for the direction they're going to be taking. We also asked Martin for his views on high temperature pyrolysis, producing hydrogen, and the growing interest in microwave pyrolysis. We finish with some discussion on the dark side, the less technical processes that get used in India in particular and in Southeast Asia that give pyrolysis a bad image, something that the industry as a whole needs to address.
Okay, well, there's lots to go through there, so we won't keep the viewers waiting any longer, and so we have that interview coming up for you right now.
Changing tack a little bit, a number of pyrolysis companies over the years have focused on oil. I suspect they felt that oil was easier to deal with than carbon black, because they can just take the oil and send it to a refinery. Has the current crash in oil prices changed the direction that these companies are taking? Are we seeing oil-orientated pyrolysis projects starting to look at refining their char to a recovered carbon black?
We do indeed. There is one company in Poland, Euro Ecofuels, who up to now have been focused on the oil, very high quality of the oil, different than normal pyrolysis oil. Of course, they do co-processing. They don't just pyrolyze tires, but my understanding is that they co-process shale oil with tires and get a specific oil quality, and they have the capability of steam stripping, which is one of the treatment processes for the oil. They are integrating now into recovered carbon black production and have appointed Peter Tyre as technical director for this project. But you ask whether the recent crash in oil prices had an impact, and luckily, I think it didn't have an impact. To the contrary, I see most of the activity in tire pyrolysis driven by the desire of scaling up the oil output, and that is very positive for recovered carbon black as well. And that also shows that customers are interested in the ecology part, not only in the economy of the pyrolysis oil. And no, it's not easy to sell. It usually has a very low flash point. So for the transport, that can be tricky. It is an intermediate. When you craft material safety data sheet for the pyrolysis oil, it is a really nasty stuff with a lot of PAH content and a lot of hazards, possible hazards. The process every tire pyrolysis company should integrate for selling the oil is fractioning and distillation, so that at least the top fraction can be treated differently, and the pyrolysis oil, the main fraction or even the bottom fraction, can have higher value add in separate as the raw pyrolysis oil. For example, I'm always motivated in material valorization, both for the recovered carbon black, that meaning tire to tire, recovered carbon black going back in the tire. For the oil, this could mean chemical recycling into polymers, or what I'm very interested in, and where I have ongoing projects, pyrolysis oil as a feedstock for carbon black, because the bottom fraction of the pyrolysis oil could be a very nice feedstock addition for carbon black production. It's highly aromatic, basically consists of carbon only, very faint quantities of oxygen, nitrogen, or sulfur.
Okay. Is the char from high oil output pyrolysis plants suitable for use as an RCB, or is it low value waste that is expensive to refine?
One thing about the nomenclature, char is the fresh carbon. Probably you mean the raw recovered carbon black.
Yeah.
And there is, for one-step processes, as most of the pyrolysis processes are, there is, let's say, a small conflict of interest, in a way that when you optimize the process for the recovered carbon black, you want a dry recovered carbon black without any organic volatiles. For that, probably you need a long reaction time, and you need a high temperature. And that, of course, has influences on the oil as well. And when you optimize for the oil, probably you have different process conditions than for the recovered carbon black. In the end, this is an optimization question. Companies need to market both. So there needs to be a minimum viable quality for both. And when I see those companies that produce recovered carbon black, they optimize for the recovered carbon black.
Okay. Moving on slightly, there has been some research done into high temperature pyrolysis at around 1,000 degrees. DMG in the UK are claiming to produce hydrogen and a very dry char from plastics and rubber as their main outputs. Is this viable technology to generate local hydrogen power sources from polymer wastes?
The 1,000 degrees is very, very hot. Normal one-step pyrolysis reactor might be anywhere between 350 degrees Celsius and on the high end 700 degrees Celsius. And the 700, that is the second stage kiln of black bear carbon. They optimize for the oil in the first reactor, which is, I think, low temperature, 300 degrees, 400 degrees. And then they get a dry carbon on the second stage at 700 degrees. 1,000 degrees is really hot, blazing hot. It is almost close to gasification temperatures, which start, I think, at 1,400 degrees. The risk there is that we get an excessive amount of fresh carbon, char, or carbonaceous residues coming from polymer carbonization. This would be a bad thing if you want to sell into the rubber industry. It could be an upside, it could be a bonus if you want to sell into the plastics industry. And of course, it changes the ratio of non-condensable gas and condensable gas as well, in a way that you get more gas and less oil. So at temperatures of 1,000 degrees, you probably have 20% or so non-condensable gas, pyrolysis gas. You have oil maybe only at lower than 40%, 35%. And you get a lot of raw recovered carbon black, because there's a new component, a lot of char added to the recovered carbon black. So I would say it's feasible. I wouldn't say this is better than the other processes. Microwave processes can get to 1,000 degrees inside the rubber because the microwave heats the rubber and not the reactor, the process, the reactor, the kiln. And it changes the mass flow output.
Okay, you mentioned microwaves. That brings us to the next question. There have been a few microwave projects over the years. We understand one plant in the Ukraine could be close to commercial operation. Is there a future for microwave technology in commercial pyrolysis?
Yes. You know that I have a high interest in microwave pyrolysis because I see that the recovered carbon black coming out of a microwave pyrolysis is quite different. Microwave is a very efficient heating process, so the residence time is very short, temperatures are very high, which means that the char we spoke about is not as high as with other processes, for example, a normal batch process, discontinuous pyrolysis. Now, most of the tire pyrolysis companies are still startups and they haven't fully commercialized. And it's more so true for the microwave companies that are not yet close to commercial operation. I actually don't know the Ukrainian microwave company. I work with companies in the UK, in Italy, in Switzerland, in the US. I found a new microwave pyrolysis company in Denmark, and they're not yet at the commercial stage.
Looking at India in particular, the Indian Green Tribunal has instigated a report into the effectiveness of what they call advanced batch pyrolysis. India has a huge pyrolysis sector with a very difficult international perception. Would you care to comment, perhaps in general, about the low quality processes that can be found across much of Asia? Can these sometimes dangerous and illegal operations ever be properly updated? Or will it take government regulation to mandate clean processes? What sort of incentives might help, do you think?
I think there are a range of issues with that, and we see that in India, we see that in China. China has actually taken away operating permits for all batch pyrolysis processes in 2012. They still haven't fully executed on that because it's so difficult to find all the companies. And we see the same in India. I think aggravating to that is that those companies, they're all at the shore, and they don't even recycle Indian tires. They recycle 200,000 tons coming from the UK, and maybe 100,000 tons coming from other European countries. And that, at the onset, that is not very sustainable to me, because technologies are known, and there's a number of really good companies in the UK that should recycle the UK tires in the country. That makes more sense to me. Now countries like India are shutting the door, like China has banned plastic imports. India is about to close the door for tire imports. That is good for India, and that is also good for the exporting countries. Of course, there is a lot of bale tires exporter in the UK that now have to change where do they go with the tires. But as you said, there are so many promising companies in the UK. That should be an opportunity. As for India, so the feedstock, that's only the starting problem, and the operation, the conditions and the safety, work safety, is a huge other problem. These installations are very cheap installations of Indian or Chinese kilns. The kilns are filled manually, maybe not even properly cooled down. There is no work safety. There is escapes of gases and aerosols of the raw recovered carbon. Those companies are mainly after the oil, and they don't have a good material valorization for the carbon. Sometimes the carbon is briquetted and also used as a solid fuel. That is not good practice. And I think that also brings on a bad image on the industry, because now companies in Europe or in the Western world, they don't want to call themselves pyrolysis companies anymore. They do thermolysis, they do depolymerization. There's a lot of creativity in that sector of what they do, but the process still is pyrolysis. But unfortunately, because of those high-profile news from India, China, Bangladesh, Africa, emerging countries, that casts a bad name on pyrolysis, which is a shame, because it's a good process. It's a very flexible process to recover waste, rubber waste that is a composite, that is together glued with textiles and metal, which is very difficult to recycle in any other way. And so it's good that these rookie operations are being shut down.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Martin. It's been a very enlightening discussion. Thank you very much for being our first expert witness, and hopefully we'll be doing more of these in the future. Thank you.
And there you have it, another fantastic segment there with Martin. What really caught your attention, Ewan, when you were talking to Martin in part 2?
The first takeaway was the observation that pyrolysis firms are now having to chase both ends of the market, oil and recovered carbon black. That hasn't always been the case. In the past, firms focused on one or the other. Now they need to maximize value and get return from both sides. The second is the reality that there needs to be a move away from the low-tech pyrolysis projects, pyrolysis operations that we see in the Far East. They're polluting, they're not safe to the employees, and they give the whole industry a bad name, when in fact pyrolysis can be a very clean technology and a very beneficial technology for everyone.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, the pyrolysis is such a sort of like thing that is emerging quite a lot at the moment, with a few projects popping up around the world. So talking to someone like Martin, it's quite illuminating in that field. But unfortunately, that marks the end of the 2-part interview with Martin von Wolfersdorff. If you want to see part 1 of the interview, please take a look on our YouTube channel, as it's available over there. It's also available on Facebook as well. Thank you for your time again, Ewan, and thank you for completing the interview with Martin. And thank you to all the viewers who've tuned in and had a look at today's interview. And we'll be back with another edition of the Tyre Recycling Podcast shortly. Thank you for watching.